There it lies, nestled in the high mountains, the little blue eye of faith, the deep turquoise lake of life, Blue Lake, my church, guarded by Mother Earth, surrounded by life, rippled by the wind. Its life-giving water flows, yet within its depths, mysteries lie, those which man will never know.
Welcome to our home. Taos Pueblo is known as being the oldest living continuously inhabited community in the United States.
My people, the Taos Pueblo people, the people of the place of the Red Willows, my people have been living here, we say, since time immemorial. The whole land that you see, that mountain has a lot of meaning to our people. The village itself here is linked to Blue Lake, spiritually, culturally, and physically.
Our nations have experienced a lot of hardships. We've had our land taken from us. We've been removed. We've been divested of all our religions sometimes, our economic means of survival, our educational opportunities. If it hadn't been for little old Taos Pueblo in northern New Mexico waging a 90-some-year fight with the U.S. government to get our land back, I don't think that we would have had tribal nations achieve what we've done to this point.
What I heard, what I saw, is what I'm preserving, because I want my people to know that there's a land that we enjoy as our own. It did not come easy. We almost lost this land. And what our tribal leadership did over the 64 years, they never gave up the fight for the return of Blue Lake to Taos Pueblo.
We are the furthest most northern Pueblo here in New Mexico. We are also known as the headwaters of the valley.
Everybody has that connection to the lake. Every year we make a pilgrimage around the latter part of August for our redemption, for our forgiveness, for our well-being and livelihood. The trail is a test of your willpower. It's a sacrifice. Back here is Wheeler Peak, the highest mountain in New Mexico. There's a spring at the bottom of this ridge, and that's a very sacred spring for us. That's where it feeds the lake. That's why this lake is so significant to us. It's not that we look forward to fighting with the government. It's that sometimes they make decisions that aren't well thought out, and this was one of them.
So since colonialism, the tribes in New Mexico were really impacted by three governments. We had Mexico, we had Spain, and then the United States government.
We first came in contact with the Spanish in the 1500s. With that contact, it was very violent and intentional with the search for gold. And so in 1680, Taos Pueblo is known as being the leader in what's now known as the Pueblo Revolt, which was the only successful revolt against European invasion at that time. And they stayed out of this area for about 12 years. I think we just knew that they weren't going to stop coming. And so we see that happen for about another 300 years, and then we start seeing the Americans coming into the area.
When the non-Indian people started coming into this area, we began to lose a lot of the lands that we had used previously. And the mountains that you see in the background is just a small part of that huge aboriginal area. In 1906, this area was taken away by the federal government, and they were not consulted, they were not asked. So in subsequent years after 1906, it was a very difficult period for my people. Cattle grazing was going on, gold mining was going on, logging operations were going on. We were at a disadvantage because Many of my people did not fully understand the English language. It was difficult for them to express their objections to the taking of this land. Then in the 1950s, when the Indian Claims Commission started addressing the loss of lands by Native Americans, tribes were being offered monetary compensation for losses of their lands. But our people refused monetary compensation for the Blue Lake area. At first, our people did not understand how complex that issue would be. We found out that the only way land could possibly be returned to an Indian tribe was through the congressional legislation process.
This is Mr. Paul Bernal. He was the interpreter during this time. He was basically one of the few men in the community that could speak English. So Mr. Bernal was a very important figure in this whole battle.
Since he had the knowledge of the outside world and the tongue of the outside world, English, they asked him to interpret our Tiwa language into English, and he traveled with all the elders that only spoke our Tiwa language. And this young man fought for this land for over 25 years, 48,000 acres of land that was being taken away. And I'm honored to talk about this young man because he's my father, Paul Joseph Bernal.
Mr. Bernal, Governor Quirino Romero, Councilman James Mirabal, Cacique Romero, and a congressional representative meeting discussing strategy.
Mr. Bernal saw the many phases of the Blue Lake struggle. The Blue Lake Bill, in what was to become law, was formulated with the able interpretation and direction of Mr. Bernal on behalf of the tribe. Mr. Bernal very ably represented the tribe through these many phases, many milestones, you might say.
Land had never been given back to an Indian tribe before, but our people went forward because this battle was so important to our people. I was seeing a lot of bad publicity and our tribal leadership not wanting to fight in the news media. I was talking with some of the younger people and we said, we need to show our support. We could be vocal out there. So several of us then got together, formed this Youth of Taos Pueblo organization. It kind of opened the door for the rest of the community to be involved in the fight. I was included by our tribal council to testify before the Senate committee hearings on Blue Lake. We pulled people together that were involved in the fight. Jerry Strauss, an attorney working in the law firm that was supporting Taos Pueblo in the Washington legislation process.
Among those people that were helpful to us in getting our land back is Mr. Fred Harris.
Senator Fred Harris from Oklahoma, LaDonna Harris, who was a strong supporter of the Blue Lake cause.
My dad remembers very well when the Taos leaders came to see him in his Senate office, and they had been working for years and years before they met my parents to get this land returned. My dad said that it was probably the most significant meeting that he ever held in his Senate office. And he immediately called my mother, and they decided that if they didn't get anything else done in Washington, D.C., that they would get this land returned to the people of Taos. And my dad was in the Interior Committee, and he said that he wouldn't allow a single bill to go through that committee until they addressed Taos Blue Lake and sent the bill to the floor.
The tribal elders from Taos Pueblo came to see me and asked me to lead their fight in the United States Senate. They'd already been able to get approval of their bill for the return of the sacred Blue Lake lands. And I was so profoundly moved by the spirituality and by the strength and determination of these elders. I think what it shows in a way is this, that, Taos Pueblo is a very small Pueblo, but they had courage and they had determination, and there wasn't any question about how deeply they felt. And I said, let's do this if we don't do another damn thing while we're here.
So there were two departments within the administration that were at odds with each other. Department of Agriculture, where the Forest Service was against the return of Blue Lake to Taos Pueblo. But the Department of Interior was for the return of Blue Lake.
Senator McGovern, who was the head of the Senate Select Committee on Indian Affairs, was not supportive. Mo Udall, who later became a great champion for Native peoples, was not for this land.
Ironically, the person who was most adamant about preventing the return of our land was our own congressional representative, Clinton P. Anderson. At that time, he did everything in his power to block that legislation.
Well, that's really where my mom got involved. Her talent is really getting people together, connecting them, and so she was able to really make this a moral issue, a religious freedom issue, a human rights issue, not just a return of land in a legal sense.
So here I was, a Comanche Indian Democrat sitting in the White House, working with members of the White House staff. But it was that kind of spirit, it's the Blue Lake spirit, I think, that made it a bipartisan effort. And we brought together several different groups of people. We had labor leaders, we made it a civil rights issue, we made it a religious issue. When then Senator Anderson approached Fred Harris and said, Senator, I don't mess with your Indians in Oklahoma and you don't mess with mine in New Mexico. And Fred said, Senator, they're not your Indians. I think that was the beginning of the respect of Indian people and Indian tribal identity throughout the Congress and throughout the administration.
My parents were very active in the self-determination movement. In fact, I remember sitting at the dining room table deciding what terminology to use in the campaign for self-determination, and they threw around sovereignty and other terms and chose self-determination, and that was really what caught on, because non-natives could be for that. Republicans and pull yourself up by your bootstraps could be for Native American self-determination, and so she got a great coalition of religious leaders, political leaders, social justice leaders, and they formed a very strong lobbying group. She was on the commission, the selection commission for White House Fellows. And Bobby Kilberg was a young attorney, and she was in the White House program.
So I was assigned to John Ehrlichman in the White House. The president called John Ehrlichman into his office. John was in charge of domestic policy. He said, as a matter of fact, I'm very angry at the state of Native American affairs in this country, and I want you to fix it and go get it done. And John said, all right, the president says that we are going to address Native American issues. Who in this room knows anything about Native American affairs? And finally, I raised my hand and I said, John, I do. And so he looked at me and said, that's it, you're on. And I said, I'm on what? He said, you're in charge. I said, really? Well, first you have to understand President Nixon. He was a very complicated man, but he was a man, interestingly enough, with a very strong sense of what was right and what was wrong.
This effort was so overwhelming, and there were times when our legitimacy was in question, that the council at one point decided that they should take some congressional representatives to the lake to see for themselves.
In the summer of July of 1970, the Taos Pueblo invited us to come to Taos and to go up to Blue Lake. They put us on horses and we rode 5 or 6 hours up through meadows and valleys and forests to get up above the tree line. I looked down and I saw Blue Lake, and it looked like just a sapphire jewel. And when we got to the shore of Blue Lake, it wasn't like a sapphire anymore. It looked like a teeming, vibrant, live lake. And then one of the tribal elders explained to me the significance of the lake to their religion. And that just made it exceedingly, exceedingly special. And that was a very unique honor.
At the time, Richard Nixon was president of the United States, and what we did not know is where the leadership, the White House, stood on this issue. But in July of 1970, all of a sudden, within a matter of a couple of days, word came to our people that we were being summoned to the White House for a meeting with the president. But when the president came in, he was very cordial with all of us, very friendly with all of us. He said he had, a long time ago, he's a Native American coach that was very influential. He learned a lot about the plight of American Indians from that gentleman. And he said that whenever he would be able to do something to improve the lives of American Indians, he would do it. President Nixon said he was pledging his support of the new American Indian policy. The return of Blue Lake would be the cornerstone of that Indian policy. We still had congressional hearings that we had to go through before Congress passed the legislation. But he promised us that if that legislation came to his table, he was going to sign that legislation. And as it was, the president, on December the 15th, 1970, signed the Blue Lake legislation into Public Law 91-550. So that returned Blue Lake to us.
In a White House ceremony today, President Nixon signed a bill returning to the Indians some land seized in 1906, including Blue Lake, which is sacred to the Taos Pueblos. Robert Pierpoint reports.
The president told the Indians that returning some of their land was simple justice. Thanking him through an interpreter was the spiritual leader of the Taos Pueblos, Juan Romero.
I want you to know that to have these eloquent remarks today on this occasion shows us that our Indian people, who are a small part of America in numbers, have made an enormous contribution because they have given great character to so many parts of our country. We're grateful for that.
And Nixon actually looked up and looked straight at my dad and said, "I can't believe I'm signing a bill that was co-sponsored by Harris and McGovern." So it was truly bipartisan, truly a higher moral issue.
And I remember all the festivities that they had in 1971 to celebrate the official return of the lake and the legislation. An historic event. It was a very historic event. As you know, that event was a catalyst for other types of Native American legislation, like the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, the Historic Preservation Act, the Cultural Properties and Archaeological Resource Protection Act, and just to name a few. Indian Self-Determination and Educational Assistance Act was the biggest one because that recognized tribal sovereignty and provided funding so that a lot of tribes could undertake economic and educational and other social service initiatives for their own people by their own making.
So the self-determination also creates the pathway on how we can teach our youth. We have our language immersion, which is taught to our kids at a young age.
That's it. Grandmother taught her that song, so she was a teacher here at the day school, did the language teaching, so she has a big influence on Amari and the language too, so we're very thankful for that.
You know, it's through that sovereignty. It's an inherited right. We have to exert our sovereignty every day because that is always being challenged, whether it's by the federal, by the state, and how we self-identify. And, you know, we want to make sure that we give our people every opportunity to be able to succeed, living the way our ancestors and our forefathers did for thousands of years. The way we live our life is not just for the Pueblo, but for the world, Mother Earth, for the sun, the moon, the stars, the sky, the water that passes through this pueblo.
What we have here in the community is we have a direct line to our history. We have a direct line to who we are and where we've come from. Our resilience has taught us that we can, continue to fight for who we are and where we stand.
And it's going to be up to us as the future leaders to continue the fight and the struggle, and it's not over. And this is something that, we need to protect, is our way of life, our land, our sovereignty.
We feel that it is very important for the younger generation of Native Americans across the country to understand what my people, the Taos Pueblo people, went through to get its land back. This accomplishment is important for all American Indians. So now, Blue Lake is our land. It's held in trust by the federal government, and then the American Indian policy is alive and well.